Our next steps is setting up our camera. Now I'm going to use our new V-Ray object properties we have created as quick selection sets. So for instance, I'm just going to grab the cups and go right click, select set members. So it'll select everything in there. I'm just going to hit H to hide it. I'm not going to need the portafilter and this theme picture. Reason why I'm cleaning this up is because we need to match our reference. I'm going to drag this over here. So I took a crack at this earlier and I ran into a few issues, and there are quite a few variables to take into account. I'm looking at a few sections here, like this area seems very clean and flat, and then there's areas where there's quite a bit of perspective, so it made me believe that there might have been multiple cameras rendering different sections of this asset, which is pretty normal in product rendering. Some things just look better in some cameras, and then you just gotta put them all together and make sure that it looks nice and clean. Also, art direction, depending on the art director, might want this and might want that. Another thing was the model that I downloaded might have been modeled just based on images and maybe not on AutoCAD, so things are maybe not one-to-one to the final product. So that was a few things that I ran into. Things were just not lining up very well, but I'm just going to show you my process when it comes to locking down a few of these cameras, and we're going to end up with a few, maybe not too many, like 2 or 3, and we'll see how we're going to set up our workflow moving forward. So just close this out, and the first thing I'm going to do is set up our ortho camera just so you guys can see how it's coming out if we just do a straight orthographic. So I'm going to go under panels, orthographic, and I'm going to create a new front camera. Go there, and I'm just going to rename. First thing first, always rename. I'm going to do this as cam render. And I'm just going to name it ortho for now. And I always like to make sure I have this, the film gate or the resolution gate, doesn't matter, visible, just so we kind of can see the whole thing as like a slight overscan. And I'm going to pull out. So I'm going to bring in an image plane that we're going to align this to. I'm going to go under View, Image Plane, Import Image. And let's just grab our image. Here we go. So the ortho camera and image planes is an interesting relationship. They're kind of independent, and that's not really going to work for us. So there are a few ways to get them to talk to each other, and at least they'll help us kind of align a few things. It's a bit hacky, but that's the way that I usually end up going if I do need to go the orthographic route. So I'm just going to go into this view so we can see both at the same time. Then in our perspective, as you can see, if I go camera render here and I hit F, you see there's the image plane and there's the camera and our assets all the way over there. So let us start by connecting, at least making sure that the image plane respects this aspect ratio we have over here. At least get it to scale up correctly, more or less to what we need it. What I usually do is go under Windows, General Editors, Connection Editor. Now, if you were to just kind of load Cam Render Ortho and just hit reload left, it's going to give you a few properties you can grab. But what you really need is to grab the shape, not the transform node. So if we go right click, show shapes, it's going to open up this little drop down. And now we're going to be able to access these two things. So this is the transform. This is what you use to basically do this. And then in here is your shape, which has all the attributes of this specific thing. For instance, all the ortho camera settings. And then here is all our translate. Cool. So what I need is the shape, reload left, and then the image plane, I'm going to need the shape as well, reload right. So now I'm going to move this over to the side so you guys can see what's going to happen as I start connecting these things. Okay. Under reload left, which is the Cam Render Ortho shape, we're going to need our orthographic width, which if I go into the properties real quick, essentially we need this guy. This kind of handles our scale. So I'm gonna just scroll down here. orthographic width. Let's grab this, and then under image plane shape 1, this guy, let's go down, and we just need to connect the width right here. Bam. So that kind of snaps automatically, and now it's sort of offsetted. We need to kind of fix a few things. Here's how it's looking. First thing I want to do is actually set it behind the asset, since this is what we're going to need to view. So I'm just going to, under Z, just kind of push it all the way back, so then we can see our asset. Cool. So now the next thing I need is for this image plane to follow our transformations that we're doing on the camera. And for that, I'm going to actually jump back, and I'm going to need the transform node. So I'm going to select the Cam Render Ortho, transform, reload left, image plane, reload right. And I am just going to connect our translates. So I'm going to need translate X, connect to translate X, translate Y to translate Y. So, like I said, it's a very hacky way, and it's a little bit buggy, but it gets the job done. Okay, so Maya's going to need a refresh for this thing to work. What I'm going to do is going to just jump out of perspective and then jump back into orthographic. And you see, now it jumped back to where we need it. So this thing is always constantly refreshing the width. This is why it's a viewport issue, and it's always has to kind of refresh every once in a while. So that's what I mean by it might be a little bit buggy, but the connection is there. So now what I'm going to do is go under, I'm going to hit 4 so we can see wireframe. And then using this up here, which is the 2D pan zoom, we can kind of zoom in and out without affecting our transformations. And what I want to do is just kind of scroll in and just kind of see what we're looking at here at a closer look, and then jump back out. It'll just snap you back to default. Okay, so now we're able to footprint using our ortho camera and our image plane. So you see, as I scale up, the image plane tries to refresh, and so this is why it takes a little bit getting used to, but it is a good way to kind of scale in and out and have the image plane follow. So if I were to just quickly try and align maybe this guy here, you'll start to notice there are a few things that are just not really aligning well. So I'm going to go into my 2D pan so we can kind of zoom in. There are a few things not really lining up. I'm going to hit shift and just grab a few things. So this shape is very different. If I just go to 5, 4. So geo is slightly different here. And then of course here is the biggest challenge. It is completely straight, but here we have some perspective, so the ortho camera is not really helping us there. But if I were to move in and out here real quick, you can see that maybe some of these parts can align and can be useful using our ortho camera. And again, like I said, maybe not everything is one-to-one. You see things are a little bit offset here and there. So it is going to take some investigating to see what areas we can get away with. So I think for this camera, what I'm going to use it for is perhaps things like these buttons to get them completely straight to the camera. Maybe this section will be helpful to get a nice clean shape. not much helpful when the body seems to have a lot of perspective going on, so that might need a perspective render for that. So I'm just going to keep this as rough. I'm not going to do this whole thing right now, but just to give you an idea, that's how I set up my orthographic cameras. And I'm going to just keep this here for now, and let's just move on to our perspective. Oh. Freaked out there for a second. All right, so I'm just going to jump out, go into perspective, and for now, I'm just going to hide this. I'm just going to go under the properties and just hit none. Okay, so now I'm going to go under perspective and create a new one. I'm going to name it, just go cam render perspective, and I'm going to call this top, and you'll see why in a second. I'm going to just really go into my channels here. I'm just going to set everything to 0, so we're facing forward. Hit 5. So you see there's quite a bit of perspective on here, and let's just get our image plane. So this is much easier. You literally just go view, import image, and you see how it follows it automatically, so that's a little bit more helpful. Now at default, our camera is set to focal length of 35. Now that is quite a lot of perspective in a lot of areas. And if you try to align it, you'll see a few things. So let's use our 2D zoom. And there's definitely areas that it might work here. But once you start going down this section, we're starting to notice quite a bit of different things happening. So first thing is I'm going to play with the focal length. I need this to be a lot bigger, so I'm just going to go 150, see how much we can flatten this. And what's happening here is now the image plane's in front of the asset, so quick fix is just going under the clicking. Let me just open this up again under shapes, under cam render top. Oh, let me just change that. Drop this down, and there's the image plane. What I'm going to do is just go down here and under depth, I'm just going to set this to 600. That's just the big number I'm putting just so it pushes it all the way back. Then let's start scaling. Now another trick I like to do is set our back face culling, which what that'll do is we won't see the geometry that's behind. So quick selection, I'm just gonna grab everything here. Display polygons back face culling. So it helps a little bit. It just hides some of the geometry that's in the back. It doesn't actually hide it, just visually under the viewport. Okay, so now I'm going to use our 2D zoom and just kind of get in there. And now I'm going to just move this around. So I'm looking at these areas here now. Let's see if we can get something. And so the problem is once you align one, then you got to make sure you're the same on both. So it does become a lot of back and forth, making sure you're as close as you can. Again, like I said, this geo might be completely different than the physical product, but looks like this is not the worst. It's getting there. It's gonna need some finessing, and also I'm noticing this is way smaller than the actual image, so this might end up being its own render, or we can just scale it post. We'll see. So if I take a look at this knob here, for instance, and I'm just going to hide geo, I'm just going to go to show, hide polygons. This one in specific, you see this perspective that's happening, so it makes me believe this camera is actually tilted. So let's go and start investigating that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select this camera, and I'm going to start rotating and seeing if we can get this a little closer, because that little perspective gave me a hint that perhaps, yeah, this is tilted slightly upwards, and that already starts breaking things down here, but it's not a big deal. Let's see if we can get it. I like doing this with two perspectives here. And I'm just gonna grab. And if I'm gonna be looking upwards at it, so we're gonna affect our rotate X in the positive. Okay. Let's go back in here, and I'm just gonna rotate X. Let's do 1.5. Oh. Okay, now let's 2D zoom in, and let's take a look. Interesting. So let's take a look at our edges. This is sort of, we're getting slightly different here, scale's a little bit off. Oh. So looks like we're losing some perspective. The camera might be way too high on the focal length. So let's bring it down. Let's say maybe 135. Let's bring back more perspective. To the zoom. And so it becomes this sort of tricky balancing act. I'm just trying to get it as close as you can. And I do get the feeling this was tilted because of that knob, but if you kind of start looking down here, we start running into a lot of other perspective issues. Let me just quickly go under shading, use default material so we can go and see everything in Lambert. They're starting to reveal underneath this tumbler, which is not in our reference. Starting to reveal a lot of things down here. And that's where the break starts to happen. Also, this is completely different from what we're seeing here, what led me to believe that there is two different perspectives. We're having one for this top section of the body, and then we have a different one for this bottom section, and then somehow we're gonna have to merge them both. Luckily for us, there seems to be a nice breaking point here that we can mask and use a matte to sort of blend, or perhaps just render this top part and we're not actually seeing the connection. So if I just hide polygons, you know, we could probably get away with just putting it behind it. And same with these guys, we can render these out as orthographic and just kind of tuck them in here. And might be all right. So this was my process. This was me setting up the ortho camera as for those sections, and now I figured out that the top is slightly tilted and the bottom might be a different tilt. It's the same process for the bottom. What I did was I created a new perspective, brought in the image plane, and just started trying to align it. Now I have another scene here. I'm just going to drag it over. This is what I was working on earlier. And so I have a cam render bottom. which is trying to get this arch and more importantly trying to get some information for this tray down here. Things are not 100% aligning, but we got something. But as you can see up here, the geo's all the way up there. And that's definitely not gonna work for the top, but it's kind of working for the bottom. Let's just switch over to the top. Just get out of 2D zoom. And there might be something there as well for this section. And now for the orthographic, like we said, can render ortho. It might work for these areas. So things like that is pretty normal. I'm not going to really worry about this handle for now. Not really worried about this piece. And if we are, then we can kind of adjust it later on. I'm more worried about getting the whole body ready for rendering. I think we're going to go this route. We will work on this in sections. We will have to render 3 different cameras, and we're going to have to rebuild the whole thing back in Nuke, which is pretty standard when it comes to product rendering. And yeah, let's think we have our cameras, give it a whirl. And once you got it all locked down, let's move on. Before we move forward, I wanted to show what the cameras are looking like right now. I have here the top section. We're going to have a bottom section and an ortho. So if I kind of zoom through here, so let's take a look at the bottom. We see how we have a little bit of perspective down here. And if we look at the top, we have this knob facing in this direction, and then orthographic would be good for things like these sections over here in accordance to our reference. These sections here, perspective here, and sections like this. Now, as we're preparing the scene, I figured that if we're going to go this route, we should start isolating other areas that we might want to play with. For instance, these sections are going to be probably better done orthographic, so I'm just going to grab them real quick. Maybe not this, maybe just only these guys. And I'm going to throw these into a V-Ray objects property. Create V-Ray object properties, single object property. And you know what, I'm just going to call this, let's figure a name. I'm just going to call this the brew head group V-Ray object properties. Select set members. There we go. Oh, I kind of don't want that in there. So in order for me to get rid of it, I'm just going to drag it up basically anywhere. And it just kind of removes it off of the V-Ray object properties. Let's double check. Boom. We might want to add. Oh, that's probably why. Okay. So that's going to be an interesting mix. We'll see how we're going to blend these two. But for now, we'll just keep this. And also from our reference, we saw that this was actually rendering out a bit smaller, or at least looking a little bit smaller than the reference. So I'm going to add that as well, so we can render that separately if we need to. And again, these are just kind of anticipation of what I end up needing. Call this the grinder. Okay, and I'm also thinking that we're gonna need all these bottom pieces separately. So I'm just gonna go in perspective just to be safe, and I'll move the camera around. I haven't locked it just yet. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab these bottom 2 pieces. This is connected up here, and I'm gonna have this section be part of the top render. So all I really need is these 2 for now. And I'm just gonna call this bottom section. Now I'm gonna just do some quick renders to showcase what I mean about separating these pieces out. I just threw a quick V-Ray light dome just to get light on everything, and I'm gonna do a quick render, and we'll go through the cameras one by one. Well, I already have one here, so I'm just gonna switch to it. I have this ortho, and this was one of the renders I did. And that's how that's coming out. So you see we are getting some of these lines that we're going to need these kind of very straight for this section. And it's giving us that clean button straight on. That could be useful. I'm looking also that we might end up needing more subdivisions in certain areas, but for now it's fine. Let's do the top. And you see we're starting to get more perspective, getting more interesting reflections. We're getting this reflection from this guy. And we're getting that knob in the perspective we need. But we're also getting this effect where it's just completely, we don't really see the tray. And this doesn't look too bad either. Obviously these sections need to be fixed. But we do want to see a little bit of the tray, and we want to see some of that swoop that's happening here. So I'm going to just grab a selection. It's going to isolate this area, and I'm going to render from the bottom camera. And also right over here, I'm going to have the render settings I'm using. I'm currently going to be rendering a 4K image, and I'm currently set to 25% of it. So just by going here, I was rendering at 25. And under V-Ray, I'm rendering in buckets. Just 112.1 threshold, just keeping it low settings for now as we're kind of dialing in things, setting it obviously to linear, don't affect colors, only adaptation, no GI. Settings are pretty much default here for now, no overrides just yet, and just no render elements. We haven't decided those yet, but yeah, I wanted to show you here, just we're seeing a little bit of that swoop. Let me get in a little bit closer here. We're getting a little bit of the swoop. We could adjust this further, and we're seeing more of the tray, and we can blend. We're going to end up having to blend this with our top renders, and as you can see, we're not 100% aligned, so we kind of want to make sure that that's aligned, just so we're not really messing too much in post to get it to blend in together. And that should be a nice, we should just scale it up and just see if we can get this aligned a little bit closer. And we are getting some interesting stuff happening here. Okay, we saw the ortho, we saw the top, we saw the bottom, we have everything sectioned off. Oh, let me show you what I mean about using these V-Ray object properties. So switching back to the top here, since these are the top renders using the top camera, I am just going to hide these pieces here using our V-Ray object properties. So what we called it was brew head group. So if you click on that and go to the attribute editor, we have independent things that we can do for everything that's in this group. So what I want to do is just check off primary visibility, and it will still be visible in reflection refractions, but we won't see it in the actual render. Let's just take a look at how that comes out. If I just grab this section and make sure we're rendering from the camera top. So as you see, we are getting the reflections underneath, which are helpful once we get those renders in orthographic. We can just put them over and we'll still have the reflections in the background that are mimicking a perspective, but the actual renders are orthographic. We're going to have to play back and forth a few times to see if we can get some interesting reflections. We might end up having to move the geo just to get reflections, maybe leaking a little bit more to the left, maybe a little bit to the right. But we'll see once we start building this, areas that we can go back and just adjust. And that's what the power of sending everything in V-Ray object properties is. We have a lot of individual control. We can also remove them from reflections altogether, and they'll be visible in refractions and still casting shadows. So if we were to do something like this, visible in reflections, we should start seeing some of these go away. Also, because they're in V-Ray object properties, you can do even more things. You can probably also, not probably, you can also make mats out of it and affect the alpha. And these are useful when you're trying to uh, basically build something and then have the alpha be affected with this geometry that's inside. So as you can see, we removed it from the reflections. They are still in the scene, and this is also helpful. So you're uh, don't having to remember, oh, what did I hide, or what did I do this, and when did I do that. Everything is in a group, and it's still visible in your scene. You're not getting geometry lost. Um, and also, we could have done is when we were hiding things earlier, like the cups. If I hit H again and reveal them, I could just go into the cups and just take off everything, and they shouldn't render at all. So what's a good section? Let's just do this top bit. But I like to try and have these render laters only geometry that I need in order to reduce compile time. So sometimes that's why either hide them completely or just don't even add them to the render layer. We're right now in the master layer, so we're just currently turning things on and off. But once we start separating these apart, I kind of want to not play too much with just hiding and unhiding. Maybe I just want to grab the geometry I actually need in the render layer. So as you can see, it's not rendering. We completely removed all these visibility options, but you see they're still in the scene. So that is just another way we can use our V-Ray object properties while we're rendering. So that's it. I think we are prepped to go. I think we're ready to start throwing in some lights in here.